We're speaking with Christian Gunning at Boingo Wireless in Los Angeles, California, and we're going to talk about Wi-Fi and access and the internet and their operation. Christian, you've been with Boingo for 10 years?
10 years.
You were one of the original folks here?
I was part of the incubator that started building the company on Sky's idea, and we all rolled into the company once we got rolling.
And is everybody still here?
There's a handful of us. We actually just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and we counted down about 11 employees who have been with this company or from one of the companies that we acquired its predecessor for 10 years. So
okay.
There's a fair number of us who have been here a long time.
Right. And what's your job?
I'm Director of Corporate Communications.
Describe Boingo and their network. I mean, everybody knows you're the Wi-Fi people. But describe exactly what you do.
Our primary goal is to make Wi-Fi easy. And the challenge is, because it's an unlicensed spectrum and there's high fragmentation in the industry, there are a lot of different Wi-Fi networks. When we started 10 years ago, we started to build an aggregated network. We didn't own any hotspots, and we did roaming agreements. So much like cell phone providers allow you to roam from tower to tower, we let you roam from network to network. We did a software overlay for that, so you can use one click to get from one network to the next network. And about 5 years ago, we acquired a company that was running Wi-Fi networks in airports, and we've gone from 10 airports with that acquisition up to 60 airports today, where we physically run the Wi-Fi network.
And you told me you have like 325,000?
Yeah. So through our roaming agreements, we have agreements with more than 125 operators around the world, and based on their networks, our customers can access more than 325,000 hotspots around the world with their one Boingo account.
Where aren't you?
Where aren't
Geographically, are you on all 7 continents, or?
We are. There's 6 of the 7. I haven't found any hotspots in Antarctica yet.
Right.
Africa is very underrepresented at this point. There are a couple of countries where there's some folks trying to get some stuff going. Latin America, South America especially, is surprisingly not as well represented. Europe is exceptionally well developed. Asia is becoming really well developed. Both of them, to some degree, better than the U.S., but the U.S. is pretty well represented at this point as well.
You know, I was just up in Oslo, Norway, and up in Stockholm, and I didn't see that many sites in those areas. Is that?
Did you visit the 7-Eleven?
No, I visited the 7-Eleven when I was in Taipei last month, and they're like on every street corner.
My understanding is that in the Nordics, 7-Eleven is like this hip, cool store, and there are actually these Wi-Fi hotspots in the 7-Elevens in some markets up there. So.
There are a lot of 7-Elevens. Actually, they carry phone cards.
Yeah.
Are you the largest in the world?
Tough to say. The numbers change every day, and depending on how people count them. As far as accessible commercial networks, sure. But there's a lot of folks who count some things that are questionably counted.
Right.
So.
Is there an association worldwide of Wi-Fi providers, or is just an independent? It's like the payphone industry, where everybody decides to get into the Wi-Fi business and derive revenue.
It's largely independent. There is an industry organization called the Wireless Broadband Alliance, the
right.
WBA, which is it's an organization that's made up of companies who have a vested interest in Wi-Fi and the use of Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi roaming agreements. And it's beneficial. They have a lot of initiatives in terms of trying to drive standardization of the roaming process to make it easier for companies like Boingo and our partners to be able to integrate our network so our customers can move back and forth seamlessly.
What's the difference between you and your competitors? Essentially your administration and large network, and that's about it?
No, I mean, direct competitors are hard to come by in this space. There's a lot of co-opetition because of the fragmentation. If you look at it from an aggregation perspective, the other major aggregator in the world is iPass.
Right.
But most of iPass's sales are direct to enterprise through their enterprise sales force, and we go direct to customer through retail. So at the sales point, we don't really compete with iPass. However, we have a platform service business where we white label our software or provide SDKs to partners, companies like FiberLink or Verizon Business. And FiberLink and Verizon Business compete head-to-head with iPass at that enterprise sales level. So they're taking our network and competing against iPass and whatever their bundled services are. But we don't compete directly with iPass. In fact, we have a roaming agreement with iPass so their customers can access the networks where we run Heathrow's network or JFK or O'Hare or Atlanta. So there's a lot of co-opetition where people would, in some segments we compete with them, but in others we, by the nature of the business, have to cooperate for a roaming relationship or to facilitate customer access or something like that. So, we probably have the largest retail network availability, just simply because iPass doesn't sell at the retail level.
Right, and they're expensive. I've looked at iPass. Is AT&T a competitor, or do you aggregate on some of their networks?
We've had a long-standing relationship with AT&T for roaming agreements and getting customers back and forth between the networks. We've got a long-standing relationship with Verizon. We've got a long-standing relationship with Sprint. We've got long-standing relationships with foreign operators like BT and Orange France and Telefonica. A lot of these people run networks in their own countries, but once their customers leave their countries, they need access to the
just
network.
like cellular.
Yeah, just like cellular. I mean, if you take perhaps one of the most advanced Wi-Fi companies in the world, KT in Korea, has long had one of the largest Wi-Fi networks in the world until recently, and yet they came to us when their customers started asking them for a global roaming opportunity. Mm-hmm. So KT customers, when they're in Korea, use KT, but when they leave Korea, they use the Boingo network to log on when they go to Japan or Australia or Singapore or China or the US or anywhere in Europe.
Right. Is there any common access problems that Wi-Fi users ought to be aware of or that you're running into, whether they travel nationally or overseas, which is a lot of my audience, corporate, that need to have access? Are you running into any technical issues or difficulties that people have in accessing the network? I know my brother called me from Paris one night. He had just arrived and he called me to tell me that there was no internet in Paris because he couldn't figure out how to log in on the Wi-Fi network there, so he assumed it wasn't there. And I always laugh about that, but do you run into those kind of issues where people really don't know how to access these networks?
I think part of the challenge is the high fragmentation, because every market you go to, there are 2 or 3 new operators in that area, and the complexity of knowing which SSID you can connect to, right, and how to figure out where to enter your credentials on a roaming page is kind of challenging, and it's why for our entire 10-year history we've had a smart client that you could download, because it literally takes all 325,000 hotspots and make them act exactly the same. Mm-hmm. You go there, it tells you which SSID to connect to, helps you connect to the SSID, and says, use Boingo here, and it's literally one click gets you onto the network, regardless of where you are. And
do you have those apps for all 3 of the major operating systems now, 4, BlackBerry, Android, iPhone, and Symbian or Microsoft?
So we've got them for Windows, Macintosh, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, not yet updated to version 7, but on the way. Symbian S60. We had done a Symbian, what's the Sony Ericsson UIQ?
Right.
So yeah, we've got all of the major OSs covered. We recently released a version of the software in March that was an update for Windows, Macintosh, Android, and iOS that also incorporates facilitating connecting to free networks as well. So taking a lot of how we know how to identify a partner network on the commercial side and leveraging that same underlying technology to recognize when a network is open and when you can see the internet, and how to parse whether it's commercial and readily available or not.
And what about my Android tablet, the new software? Does your app run on that?
I believe so. I believe we've tested it through Honeycomb.
Right.
It had the UI hasn't been optimized for tablets yet, so it's still a smaller form factor, but it is functional and works.
When I log in, do you know where I'm at?
I know, yeah, based on, so when the software presents your username or password, or when you go to the roaming page and present a username and password, that location in the authentication request passes us something called a venue ID. So, it's a 9-digit number or a 12-digit number or whatever it is, and through that, against the database, I know that you're at a coffee shop in Paris on the Orange France network.
Right.
And so that's, I can place you to the physical location where you are.
And you can tell how long I was there.
And I know when you logged on and when you logged off.
Right. And that's one of the questions I'll get to, but is there any issue if I don't use the log off screen, but rather just turn off the connection? Will you guys sense that either way?
Yeah, it depends on the network. Every network will eventually time you out.
Right. But it may cost you a lot of money.
It may cost you a lot of money. Some of the networks have a timeout that is, looking for 2 minutes of inactivity, and they'll terminate the session after 2 minutes. Some of them can run up to 15 minutes of inactivity before they terminate the session.
Yeah, actually, T-Mobile ran a lot longer than that. I was somewhere in the world, and they didn't determine that I had disconnected for like an hour, which they tried to bill me for. Are you on cruise ships at all?
No,
or that's strictly the province of the cruise ships? And like T-Mobile, do you aggregate with T-Mobile so T-Mobile clients can get on your networks and vice versa?
Yeah, we've got a reciprocal agreement with T-Mobile. So, T-Mobile is probably best known for they have a number of airports like Dallas-Fort Worth and Los Angeles. They've got the airline lounges like Red Carpet Clubs and Admirals Lounges, and then they've got Hyatt Regency hotels. So Boingo customers can get on those locations using their Boingo account. Mm-hmm. And as a part of that agreement, the T-Mobile customers can log on to the 80 locations where Boingo physically runs the network. So places like JFK Airport, LaGuardia, Newark, O'Hare. You look at Heathrow. So yes, we have agreements with T-Mobile.
Do you do traffic stats to determine what percentage is email, web browsing, voice over IP communications, or do you even have that kind of information?
We don't track that today.
So you wouldn't know whether I'm making a phone call on Skype or doing my email?
I do not.
And what about, do you get megabyte data? When I log in, log out, do you get a monthly history as to how much data I actually downloaded on your network, or just log in time?
No, we track for most of our partner operators. We can track megabyte data.
And what about, and I'd asked you this in a pre-interview, what about logging as far as IP addresses, where I'm going, where and how long?
No, it's one of those things where our service is really based upon authenticating you and giving you an open pipe. We don't really trace where you go. If you look at the fact that we have over 325,000 hotspots, but we only physically control the network for 80 of those, 324,920 locations, I get a username, a start time, a stop time, and megabytes transferred, and that's all I know about your session.
And that's it. And you track subscribers by username and password. What about by MAC address?
We do by MAC address, in part because we have restrictions on how many different devices you can use on an account.
How do people get to you if they need help?
800-880-4117. We've got a 24-hour, 365-day-a-year call center that customers can call, and if they have questions about the product, if they have questions about their account, if they have issues getting logged on. We also have a very active Twitter team. So if you @Boingo us, we can usually catch you and see if we can solve your problem.